Let it flow.
What's up with the weekend? What happened?
Welcome to the Combat Based Podcast, guys.
This weekend, we had our first US-based, combat-based camp. And we had about 60 participants, and I thought it was pretty amazing.
Combat Based Reno camp, I think, was a very good camp. I think people seemed to like it. So,
Yeah, I think people really liked it. It was being the first of anything and being the contrarian and hypercritical individual that I am. I definitely saw lots of different things, like room for improvement. So I'm excited to, have time to put together the next one and think about all the different things that I might add and all the things that went splendidly well. And what I enjoyed most is connecting with different people from around mostly the U.S. this time. We didn't have anyone there from
And I would
abroad.
say, much like this podcast, our camps are something that people have suggested we do for a decade or so, and it's always taken someone else to nudge us in that area, and then we do it, and we're always glad we did it.
Yeah. What'd you think, Tobin? Because you were there.
I thought it was awesome. I had a great time.
What was your favorite part?
I really liked the striking clinic.
Oh.
I don't have much striking experience, well, I did box for a couple of years with a small group of guys in San Pedro, but I don't have any deep striking experience. So there was a great striking clinic. I really enjoyed that. And
Darian's a good coach and knowledgeable. And the thing is that I have discovered over the years, over the decades, is out of all the combat sports, boxing is the one that an instructor can fake expertise more than any of the other arts.
Not saying that anyone's doing that.
Not saying anyone's doing it. I'm just saying, well, the coach you had isn't. But there are a ton of people out there that are bag punching exercise class boxing coaches who think they know how to coach boxing, because it is the simplest of all the arts. Like, you can learn everything you need to know in a weekend clinic, and then spend the rest of your life learning how to box. Whereas with jiu-jitsu, you can't possibly learn everything in a weekend clinic. It's a more complex art, harder to fake as an instructor.
Yeah. So for me, I think a big highlight was being able to teach the women's only seminar prior to camp. I think that that's extremely important for our community, being that women are almost always the minority on the mat. It's really an important thing for me to provide a space where we are the dominant majority, if not the only people on the mat, and just talking about my experience as a female, different moves that work better for me. I really enjoyed that. And then, getting to know some of our combat-based club members that I haven't met face-to-face before. So that was really awesome. And I hope that next time we can get more of our combat-based club members to join in camp and
It was a good group.
Have time to really get to know each other in person.
And it's one of those things, like, I definitely understand why setting aside a weekend for a camp is something that real life gets in the way with, jobs, families, and all that stuff. But everybody who goes is almost always really happy that they set that time aside. You get more than just the combination of three classes. You get what I call, with the way I instruct, a narrative arc of the art. And so instead of getting the class on arm bars and then a class on mount escapes, you get the flow and the connection and the chain, and how everything comes back around to the stand-up and to the clinch and to the ground.
And then there was the 2 hours in the jacuzzi where we were just talking about jiu-jitsu and school ownership and different ideas and strategizing. I mean, like, that kind of stuff is invaluable.
Yes.
Yeah, it was good times overall. Well, today we got a guest.
Awesome.
Today we have, on the Combat Based Podcast, we have a multifaceted martial artist who has over 40 years in the traditional martial arts. He's a 3rd degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu under Chris Haueter, a Judo black belt, a submission arts wrestling black belt, a Luta Livre black belt, a Hapkido black belt, And prior to grappling, he was a successful competitive Dutch kickboxer in Southern California.
Yep, I'm going to add in there, but Bryan's an example of what I call a true mixed martial artist. Before MMA became boxed into a sport.
And he trained extensively with legendary catch wrestlers Billy Robinson, Josh Barnett, Erik Paulson, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, and Mike Martelle. He's the host of the internationally renowned podcast Level Up Grappling, the head coach at PCI Jiu-Jitsu in Mission Viejo, and the vice president of USA Catch Wrestling, Bryan Roig.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming
Brian.
up and
What
hanging
a
with us.
resume.
Thanks
I
for
know.
coming. Yeah.
I'm impressed.
It's a lot to digest.
Well, we could add the academic stuff too.
No one cares about that, right?
Exactly. I don't even care about that.
Well, I remember back when Bryan and Chuck would come at least once a week, some often more, and we'd be right back here in the garage going over everything from the pressure game to comparing and contrasting grappling styles. It was a good laboratory experience, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was. So push it back, a few decades. When Chris was still in his 30s, and a bright young man filled with
And
energy.
I was a baby?
and she was he plucked her out of high school. That's another story altogether.
Not Epstein-like, but
Yes,
anyway.
not Epstein. But the internet wasn't a thing, right? So people have to realize, like today's day and age, with everybody, younger people and stuff, that you can find anything on the internet.
It's funny, I'm like, it wasn't?
Yeah. So it's like the internet wasn't a thing. So at the time, you would hear these whispers. If you want an American to teach you, there's a guy by the beach. It's Chris Haueter. But it's hard to find him, and it's hard to get him on the phone. So good luck trying to get in contact with him. So it was like trying to get Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, and like when you go to the swamp and try and find where's Yoda. So once you find him, like looking you up and down, what do you want? Type of thing. Well, I got to learn because this isn't working. This is like okay, and then that's when the beatings commenced, and I think back then. There was a certain trial by fire, right? Like, okay, how much of a beating can you take? Are you going to come back? Because it wasn't what it is today, where everybody's doing whirly-twirly and, they're talking about what the next recipe is for their coffee cake and, their wife laid out their gi pants for them and all this nonsense. It was different. There was blood on the floor. There was blood on the gi. Anything that's padded is legal. So it's a different mindset when your coach is hitting you and telling you, Bryan, you're not going to die, move. And you feel like you're in the process of death, right? But that's where that transformation for me kind of took place, because it was very much, for me, it was a lot of therapy. It was a lot of therapy being here with Chris and then having Melissa armbar me every 5 seconds, because that was her thing. The guard pass, the spinning armbar, blah, 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 blah. Didn't matter.
Still is.
So, okay, see, there you go. I had to have that therapy, that transformational kind of like riddance of a lot of like demons and ugliness that was within me, of how I grew up. And that took me through hell. It took me through another stage of hell, like Dante's Inferno. And it brought me out the other side. And so the foundation of what I teach, people say, well, if you're teaching catch wrestling, why do you call it jiu-jitsu? Because that's half of my DNA. That's my dad. But the thing is, what I always tell people is, if you learn Chris Haueter jiu-jitsu, which is basically Keegan Machado style jiu-jitsu, it's like catch wrestling with a gi on. It's not very different, right? There's pins involved. It's very brutal. It's malicious. It's a very violent style of jiu-jitsu versus, like I said, the patty cake shit that we see today with so many other places. So to me, I always found it very complimentary. So it's just like, I can't disrespect the Hauters, not have some type of term of jiu-jitsu at my school. But then the PCI stands for pin, control, isolate, because that's what Billy Robinson always used to say. pin the closest joint, control the surrounding area, isolate for a 2-on-1. So we had this self-coaching, this map. We already knew the map of how we were going to hurt somebody. And then you just add in the Haueter Jiu-Jitsu, and it's really two halves of the same whole to me.
Yeah, I think, and this might be a tinge of my own narrow-sightedness and arrogance, but like back then, each of the grappling arts definitely had a distinct expertise. And in the early days, there was guys like Keegan Machado, a lot of Hickson and the Hickson guys, who were definitely evolving into a pressure game. But it was always based much more upon what I call the think street. The aura was like you couldn't escape that. And then when the sport came in, you could forget about a street completely for months at a time, thinking about what sport match you're going to have, the time involved, the rules involved. You aren't hitting. And then the art part was always how do we make it more efficient, more beautiful, and that takes away some of the like strength explosion part of the art out. And so back then, that was a lot of what we were working on, learning from our mentors, and at the same time, what I call finding that yin and yang. And sometimes what the guy under you was feeling was the opposite of what you were actually mentally engaged in, which was very much flow and control with structure and weight, which equals pressure. But to them, they feel like it's just a beating.
Like they're getting crushed.
Yeah.
Yeah, pressure taps. Chris is really into pressure taps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not as much anymore,
Well,
but
he was.
and the pressure game is now mainstream. It's like everybody kind of knows it now. But there was definitely a time where, especially pre-internet, it was rare.
Yeah.
That when I would roll with a lot of guys who were really good, I used to laugh and call it Nerf jiu-jitsu because it felt light. It might be really fast. They might nail me in a choke, get my back, but that style was after how do I feel like the wind? And then their pressure game was how do I feel like a boa constrictor slowly constricting you? And as a guy who was light and could move fast, I didn't want to have to move fast. I had heavyweight envy. I wanted to go slow and crush you because that just seemed so much more punishing.
But you also had a dynamic,
I did.
fast game.
Yes,
as well.
I was fast.
So, like, it's kind of, I think, beneficial to have both.
I think so.
Because then you're more elusive. You have many different speeds, variations.
My philosophy is it's always beneficial to have both. But let's get this back on Bryan. Otherwise, I'll talk the fuck.
No, it's good. This is like always good learning experience.
I'm curious, and I think other people are curious to know a little bit of history of catch wrestling, because it's something that I hear about, right? And there's a lot of like legendary catch wrestling guys that you hear about, but I don't think people really know how that's distinctly different from Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah. So, well, it's funny because before we started recording, we were talking about the seminar I had a few weeks ago on the double wrist lock. And you're like, well, what's that? And I'm like, oh, you've heard of it as the Kimura, but they do it wrong. And so I was kind of showing you a couple little things. Catch wrestling, the term catch wrestling really didn't come about till about 150 years ago or so. It's wrestling. It's just wrestling with submissions. And
England and Scotland, right?
yeah, but prior to England and Scotland, the submission wrestling existed in Rome. It existed in ancient Greece. It existed in Egypt. It existed in Babylon. It existed in India. So all over the world, they had catch wrestling. It's just submission-based wrestling. 1904, and this is how interesting, it's interesting to me how quickly we forget our history.
Yes.
1904 was a pivotal moment in amateur wrestling. That's when the Amateur Wrestling Committee, the Olympic Committee, took submissions out of amateur wrestling.
Wow.
So 1904 Olympics was the first time they banned submissions. So in the last 120 years, you see a divergent styles of wrestling, right? Folk style, freestyle, the Greco, stuff like that. But their origins are all submission based. As an example, one of the most famous catch wrestlers is Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
He's a big boy.
Yeah, they didn't call it catch wrestling at the time. It was just wrestling, but
yep.
it was submission based. So you have different styles of catch wrestling. So I was trained in the English style, the Lancashire style, and also the Japanese style. They're actually very different, even though you have like Carl Gotch and Billy Robinson were the two biggest proponents of catch wrestling in Japan. The Japanese took it and made it much more actually violent. They made it much more submission focused versus pin focused. Because in Europe, we've all heard the term no holds barred, right? So where that came from was from catch wrestling tournaments.
Yes.
So it was determined whether or not you would allow chokes, right? You would allow this, you would allow that. What was a dirty move? The strangles were considered the dirtiest of moves. Back in the day, the jiu-jitsu people considered the leg locks the dirtiest of moves. Well, the catch wrestlers considered the strangle the dirtiest of moves. So depending on where you went, if you were in Poland, Germany, England, each match would have a different rule set. Okay, you can't do leg locks, or you can't do a choke, or this and that. So no holds barred meant anything
Yes.
goes.
And back then, there was like the term wrestling. Catch became distinct because once you removed subs, you couldn't tell which kind it was, and you had unlicensed boxing and no holds barred, but depending on the promoter and who it was, because this is pre-film even. Yeah. So entertainment was much more live, whether it was a live play you'd see, a live music and song and dance, or what we would now call martial arts.
So basically what happened is if you actually look at the Gracie family, and I won't get too much into it.
The Scottish roots.
The Scottish people.
I've read this before.
Right?
Yeah.
And we actually did an episode of my podcast last year where we actually went to the Scottish festival and did the genealogy search, and we printed up the Gracie family crest from Scotland. Yeah. So they were only 2 generations removed from Scotland. They're Scottish.
Didn't Hickson do that research too? I feel like in his book he talks about doing something.
I'm not sure. I am the worst person to ask on anything for accurate history.
So what ended up happening, a lot of people don't know that the Gracie family had a circus. They had catch wrestling matches.
Yes.
That's how they made money, was through catch wrestling matches.
Because back in the old times, again, entertainment, we didn't have film, and traveling, carnivals always had a strongman. Yeah. And have a guy who the local townspeople would know a challenge is there. If I put up $10 and see if I could last 1 minute with the wrestler, and the wrestler then would twist you up like a pretzel. So you look at old newsprint from local small town Kansas. The carnival came through and the mayor was injured by the wrestler because he got drunk and challenged him over $5 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And that was how he made money.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be the income stream for professional jiu-jitsu athletes these days.
Yep.
Just throw it out there. $100. I guess there's that guy. Those guys do that.
Yeah.
On YouTube.
I saw that.
In a bikini.
Yeah. There you go.
Even back in when I was involved in the late 80s, early 90s, it was not uncommon that people would be more curious, and especially when you were smaller and not as yoked, you some big buff guy and say, "Oh, I'll kill that guy," and I'd say, "Well, I'll tell you what, I don't fight for free, but if you want to bet $20, throw down that, and I promise you, within 1 minute, you will want to quit. I will make you want to quit." And like that, like anyone just, come on, get the fuck out of here, right? Because back then, people didn't even think what a sub was. Yeah. But then when you have them in a choke and they're going in and out of consciousness, you want to quit yet? They'll say yes.
There is a guy in Venice.
Yeah.
I think
Who does
his
that?
name's the Sandman. And he's a 10th planet purple belt.
Yeah.
And he goes out there in Venice with a big sign that says, "Take me down or sub me for $100." And anybody that walks up, he's got a little, sometimes he just goes on the grass.
Yeah.
Sometimes he lays out a little mat.
That's
And he goes
such
for
a
it.
return.
So
to,
then if they get him, they get $100?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
take him down, or if they sub him, they get $100.
which always
But
shocks
they have
me.
to pay to play.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yes.
You have to,
You
otherwise
have
how
to
does
pay
he
to play.
make money?
And I always wonder why there isn't a line of
Oh.
current top-ranked grapplers doing it.
I think nobody
I'm
wants
sure
to get
it's on
exposed.
YouTube.
Yeah.
But at
that's
the end
what
of the
Toby-
day, I don't think anybody wants to get exposed.
No.
It's a fun little hype thing,
Yes.
but
Unless you're at the very top
You're not gonna-
and at the top of your game, it's not the smartest way to work your way to the top of a bracket.
no, not at all. Because that's where like real injury happens.
Yes.
And, you know,
Real
But if
injury.
you're
happens.
young and you're trying to make money, I see.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I see. Because the young are invincible. Didn't
Yes.
you know that? I
Yes.
was.
But I always think that which I don't do very much anymore because they are so hard. The hardest role is that athletic guy from some other sport who's a white belt who has no idea that he should even tap. I always say it's like stuffing a cat in a pillowcase. You'll do it, but there's nothing fun about it. There's no enjoyment at all. I would way rather roll with the technical guy, which is non-injurious, than the athletic spaz who does CrossFit 3 times a week and played water polo. That guy's a pain in the ass. Yep. That guy is a pain, especially as we age. Because then we win, they walk away with a big smile, impressed, and go, I want to do jiu-jitsu now, and you're fucking injured.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck that.
exactly.
So where do the Gracies play into this catch wrestling story?
So, where did the Gracies play in? Their father had the circus. Now, Drysdale's already and multiple other people have dispelled the myth that the Gracies never trained with Maeda.
They trained with a Maeda student.
But Carlos did.
Yeah. But you always claim the top of the pyramid.
Sure.
It's like, I'll just add a little story. So when I was a new black belt, there was a pretty prominent Hollywood back guy, not an actor, but in the backgrounds. And he was kind of demanding, and he would want privates on demand when he was off work. And I'm a new black belt, and I'm young, and I'm thinking maybe I could get connected to Hollywood, right? All those dumb things. And, you know, he would call me. It was pre the texting, and okay, hey, I have 3 hours. Look, can I have a private? And I'd go down, meet him at Boxing Works, and he was pretty good. He was a blue belt. He was okay. And he was a student of one of the big names. And I remember asking him, why don't you get privates from the big name guy? And he's like, oh, you're a better instructor and you're cheaper. And like, it's like, well, fucking who am I? And then like I gave this guy, he would be impressed. He'd be like, wow, I never learned that from blank. I never learned that from blank. Why didn't he show me that? But then he would go get his rank from the big name guy. And that is where the first time it really clicked how the hierarchy works. And how even me, when a purple belt would show me a cool move, I don't want to claim a purple belt who taught me that. I want to say I learned that from Hickson or Hegan. It's just because it sounds better, right? And that's kind of...
You really do that?
No, your brain wants to. I don't, because I don't care anymore. But like back then...
In before me.
Before you.
Because I didn't learn to be that way. I'm like, that blue belt taught me that move.
Yeah. No, I shed that stuff by the time
you
was
met me.
a second stripe,
Yeah.
a black belt. Like that was my period where I was really studying the hierarchy, how it works, not only in our martial arts, but in all human organizations, the rare aberrations of it, and how we also naturally yield and fall into yielding to the alpha. It's such a biological drive. And when I taught the women's class, like I started the first women's class, turned it over to Leka and Cindy and all that. But I remember it was like there are some things that were the opposite. With like the guys, you had to teach them to be less aggressive and more flowy. And the girls, you had to like almost get them to be aggressive. Like, no, now get them. You're on the back, choke them, right? Yeah, it was like a reverse. And like I know a lot of people these days say, oh, you're sexist because you're saying men and women aren't the same. Yeah, I am. And women and men aren't the same. That's why if I can find 3 dudes in the ballet class and 3 women in the jiu-jitsu class.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So back in the circus.
Yeah. Back to Bryan.
Back to the
Back to the,
circus.
it's not even me, it's the circus.
Is this the circus?
Yes, it is. So back in these Brazilian circuses, it was always catch wrestlers versus judokas.
Okay.
Yes.
And this didn't just happen in Brazil. This was all over the world.
Yes. And the Japanese were bitter.
Yeah. So
It was their art.
It was
Imperial Japan was fascist, right? And it was their art.
So anybody can research an old catch wrestler named Ad Santel, who claimed himself to be the world judo champion, but he kept beating the guys from the Kodokan.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a huge controversy in the end. One day he's like, okay, I'll leave you guys alone, this and that and the other thing. But what ended up happening is, when the Gracies kind of developed their own style, because they were doing their thing, they didn't really have if you look at it, historically, they didn't have the proper foundation. Because where was their judo? Why were they getting tossed on their heads every 5 seconds? The kryptonite of jiu-jitsu is always going to be catch. The double wrist lock, throws, leg locks.
Especially back then, before the intermingling.
Yes, before the intermingling, right? So then, okay, you have to change the rules. Then you're changing the rules. Okay, we're not going to recognize throws. We're not going to recognize pins. We're going to change this. We got to change that. We're just going to sit in our guard and, sit there and do nothing and do arm bars and this and that because they can't wrestle out of a position.
Hence a term no holds barred.
Yeah.
Whether you were going to have a strict contest of who wins the throw, which is more like a judo Greco, or no holds barred, including boxing.
Yeah.
How much of that, though, is just like the purpose of or the mission of the martial art, right? Because I think like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu might argue that they're not going to teach that type of art because their goal is to have this be for a smaller person just getting away from a bigger person and self-defense type of orientation.
But that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Like, as an example, I use a saying all the time. I get in trouble from Instagram by saying this. I always put mechanics over attributes because they say that that's inflammatory and that I'm hurting people's feelings by saying mechanics are more important than attributes. But from a catch wrestling perspective, mechanics are more important than attributes. I don't want people to have, if anybody's ever listened to Chris Haueter, which it still baffles me that you have people that don't go to his seminars, don't go to his classes, don't sign up for camps, don't go to combatbase.com and sign up as members.
Thanks.
Okay, that is an issue because the foundation of everything you need to know grappling is combat base. That I'm just saying that, not just as a member, but I'm saying that because that is the foundation, and it's the same mindset as catch wrestling. Okay, so this whole idea of the small person's gonna defeat the big person. Name one.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah.
Size matters.
Size matters.
I'll tell you.
Strength
mostly
matters.
the smallest person in the room. Size matters.
I believe that's always been a marketing gimmick that all martial arts have used. And in order to sell this thing we do, there's been various methods over the years in order to make money. Like, I will wrestle for food, the traveling a carnival. And like 1960s style wrestling, they tried to get people to watch it and have it as a sport on TV. No one wants to watch grappling. It's boring. So then what we have as pro wrestling was created. What people want to see is the entertainment, the shit talk, the weigh-ins, the walk-up, the warm-up song, the hitting you with the chair, the resentment, the fantasy that one guy has been undefeated for a bunch of years, and the challenger beat him, the heel, the hero, the villain. Like, that's what they're watching. Whereas, like, for me, I'm always trying to watch the art. I have no interest. When I watch MMA, I turn down the fucking volume. I don't want
You
to
watch
hear...
MMA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not the show. I don't watch the walk-in. I don't watch the pre-fight. I don't watch the weigh-in. I watch the fight. And I turn down the volume. Because I don't want that stuff distracting me from the art. Because all I'm interested in is the art. So when people will often say, hey, did you see what Jerry Schmo did to blah, blah, blah? I have no idea what they're talking about. But then they show me on the, oh yeah, I saw that. That was awesome, how they switched here. But I'm terrible at knowing the name of who it is.
But in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu's defense, yes, Chris Haueter, you could be a smaller guy and beat a bigger guy if he doesn't know what he's doing.
That's correct.
Yes.
But if you put them both through the same training, Chris is
Not
probably
happening.
not going to beat the bigger guy. And
Yeah.
me, as a female small person, feels more confident in the world because I train, because I know how to hold a base, because I know, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I feel more confident and like maybe I'll have a better chance of defending myself because I train a realistic martial art where we're constantly doing grappling and people are grabbing at me. I'm going to have
Yes.
a better calm response if someone attacks
knowledge
me.
of the art is more important than attributes. That's why I say when we split the street art sport, the art is how do I control and submit my opponent utilizing the least amount of attributes. The sport is how do I take my art into the man-made rules of the game utilizing all of my attributes. And what we've been explaining here, what are the different man-made rules of the game? Are we talking hands only, with gloves, without gloves, include knees and elbows, include the clinch and throws, include grappling, now we're into no holds barred, MMA, what style? All that is a blend of knowledge and attributes. And if I want to clearly separate my art from the attributes, so I'm not thinking that my attribute is the art. And a lot of martial arts get caught up in thinking that the attribute is the art, or that the art is the attribute. And that's where you got to split that apart. The Hegelian dialectic again, right?
That good old Hegelian dialectic.
So it sounds like the guard playing is like sort of this component during that circus period that got developed.
The guard.
Well, even in early MMA, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because no one knew what it was.
Yeah.
Even when Chris was a purple belt and fought in the judo competition.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Well, I'll say this. So
Or don't.
I will.
Okay.
But I used to say like 10 years ago that the one thing, like each art, each one of these combat sports has an area of expertise. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, or call it Gracie, whatever you want to call it, that style, our area of expertise is the guard. Having guard and passing guard. The catch guys have another area. The Greco guys have an area. And the problem is people think that one area of expertise automatically means you're an expert in this other area, which you guys know because you also do other grappling styles. And realize, like I remember being once, I used to go to the Olympic Center, and I would instruct the U.S. Judo guys grappling. And I would destroy them on that. Olympic judo guys. And they would kill me standing up. And I remember once we're in the locker room and I'm all mad. And I remember thinking, man, I'm amazed after all these years, the jiu-jitsu's out there now, you guys still suck so bad on the ground. And he stopped as he's putting on his clothes and goes, I'm surprised that you guys still suck so bad on your feet. And it's like, that hit me like, he's absolutely right. Because we create blinders by thinking what we know, especially when we're in a controlled environment where the experiment is us rolling with 10 to 20 other guys all the time, our brains think we're being exposed to a broad environment when really we're not. And pre-internet, that was what it was, is each little group thought they had the shit. And Gracie with jiu-jitsu, let's call it Brazilian, whatever you want to call it, became masters of this one area that everybody else had neglected and avoided, which is the guard. Whereas everybody had a little bit of stand-up, everybody had some catch moves, but no one had guards. And people who say, oh, we had a guard, no, you fucking didn't. Old judo guys did before the Olympic rules killed it. That's what killed the guard in judo. Whereas, so in Japan, when they were adding these rules to make it entertaining because people want to watch throws and to preserve the art of the upright throw, grappling gets eliminated. In Brazil, especially at the dawn of the sport part, where suddenly the guard could really develop because somebody isn't raining down shots on you all the time. So I could play this spider guard, de la Riva guard, inverted guard, shin guard, all these things that would never have evolved if you always had strikes. So it takes the laboratory of removing certain X's and Y's so you get a different mathematical experiment that shoots out the other end. And that should humble you, realizing you're not some guy who invents things. You're just a little cog in the wheel going through and hopefully putting yourself in the right environment.
Very true.
Boy, I could
Very
talk
true.
a long time.
No, but it's
Hell yeah.
people need to hear this. It's educational. You know, I was fortunate enough back in the days of the garage, since it was such a small, intimate setting, I would get hours of this at one time.
You would hear me rant all the
Hey.
time.
I've been doing this for 21 years all day long.
So, you know, one of the things that
But you smartly learned how to tune me out. All right.
Oh yeah,
no, but
that's a woman's
so one of the
skill.
things he always said, which was very important, and I'm not going to say the person we were discussing, so I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah,
I'm
we
gonna
got to be
keep it-
careful.
Keep it in the closet, the name of the person. But he said to me many times, you know, there's a difference between a teacher and a coach. He's like, so-and-so is a great teacher. They can teach you 1,000 different moves, blah, 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 but they're a horrible coach. He's like, so it's one thing to teach somebody moves. It's another thing to be a coach and see the holes in somebody's game and see where the mistakes are, where the flaws, and correct it from there. He's like, so those are two different types of people. So you have to figure out what you want to be. And my whole goal was, well, I want to be a blend of both, right? I want to be able to teach, but I also want to be able to coach. And so for me, I don't teach the widest variety of moves, right? I don't teach anything moves based. I teach positionally based. So I have basically an defense 1 month, offense the next month of 6 different positions. And like I was mentioning you before, half of every one of my classes is stand-up. So the first half of every class is stand-up. So if it's a gi day, it's judo. If it's a no-gi day, it's Greco/catch wrestling with the throws, right? So that's kind of how I organize it. And then we just focus on one position that month, you know? And if it wasn't for me, if it wasn't for Chris really explaining that to me and really getting me to understand how I had to hone in on how do you explain something to somebody? What details are you giving? Because back in the day, I tell you, this is what you hear. Put your hand to here. Like this, right? These kind of like these Brazilian grunts that didn't make any sense. They were giving partial information. If you got 10% of the details, you were lucky. Okay, so when you stumble onto somebody like Chris, if you're lucky to get into now American style, and then, you know, for people that don't know, Melissa's a teacher by trade originally, right? So you have people that can literally verbalize for you the information in a way that's palatable, where you can, with a Western brain, a North American mindset, how do I digest this information? It's very different. Now there's no more grunting. I mean, I'm sure Melissa could grunt for us if she wanted to, but she's not grunting. She's actually teaching details. Chris is actually teaching details and giving you an explanation of things that you're not going to get. And then the funny part for me about the coaching aspect, he would coach it after the fact, but there was always a punishment. If I was doing something wrong, I'd get punished. So that was a beautiful part to me.
I believe in the
love
carrot and the
punishment.
stick, especially in the old days. Because back then, I was realizing that what you're really training or coaching is a person's subconscious. Because you can tell a person 100 times, instead of moving your hip that way, do this, or stop pulling guard when you're in this one area. It was easier to give them a bunch of punishment immediately, not afterwards, because then it won't work. It has to be right when you're fucking up. They need the punishment. But jiu-jitsu and catch and grapple, all these things, for the most part, already have that element. But I think the people that practice them and instruct them are often unaware of that part. And when you become aware of that element, then you know how to really reward and punish to work Piaget's learning model down to a science, right?
Well, that made me think of like how you coached us a lot. We didn't learn how to escape bad positions. We had to tap. So that's the punishment.
Yes.
Tapping is the punishment. Every time I get caught in a triangle, I have to tap.
I
Every
want
time
your
I get
ego punished.
caught in an
Yep.
armbar, I have to tap. I don't get to learn a bunch of cool escapes and how to turn it into offense because I'm learning how to not get stuck in that position
Yes.
by getting punished with the tap every time. Instead of what you would say is like, do you want to get rewarded for the 1 out of 10 times you escape the move? Or if you tap every time, you're getting punished, so you learn how to avoid the space.
That's that thing, a Pavlov's dog, right? It hears the bell, it gets food. It hears a bell, it gets food. Then you just have to do the bell and spit starts drooling out of its mouth. And so if you want to get more drool, you only reward it part of the time. Because then you get the phenomenon of anticipation. But if you reward it every time, you get less drool. And if you reward it no times, you get less. So it's finding out how to get that part of the brain that is, mechanical, autonomic, in essence, right? Because if you escape out of arm locks, 3 out of every 10 arm bars, you're going to become addicted to escaping out of arm bars.
Your
and you will
favorite
let
move?
yourself go into arm bars. But if you are punished every single time, you'll stop putting your arm in the arm bar zone. And that's like how you got to do it, because all of us get good at escaping things. And then we start thinking we're really good.
Yeah.
And then when you go against, and in the sport, why it's just a match, who cares, tap. But in the reality, a street, you don't want to think you're great at escaping arm bars in a fight to the death. You want to think, I do not want to get in a fucking arm bar. Because if you are, I promise you, you will know how to escape as good as the guy who thinks he's a great arm bar escaper.
Yeah. I got that answer a lot from Guilo Bell.
Yeah.
When I was like a white and blue belt, I'd be like, what do you do right here? And he'd be like, I wouldn't be there. That would his answer be. I wouldn't be there.
I wouldn't be there, yeah.
I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't get there.
An ounce
Never
of
let it go there.
prevention's worth a pound of cure.
Absolutely.
If we could only translate that to our real lives more.
Because this is the fake life right here.
What does the guard teaching look like in a catch wrestling situation?
So
Where does that?
It's interesting. I think one thing that we need to kind of revisit from an existential perspective, not to get too many Haueterisms here, but the one thing that separates jiu-jitsu from every other grappling art is there's no pin. Okay? Everything there's a pin. Jiu-jitsu, there's no pin.
You're not rewarded with your arm being raised up.
Yeah. So
for holding a person on their back.
So therefore, I can sit on my back as long as I want. There is a sense of urgency in every other style to get up. So imagine this. Look at it from an MMA perspective, and we were talking about this earlier. There's that fight at UFC 300, Charles Oliveira against Arman Sarukian. Okay? Oliveira's world-class jiu-jitsu black belt, couldn't get off his back. He kept trying to do the same stupid stuff over and over again. Armbar, triangle, wrestle out of the position. So what catch wrestling looks like from a body scissors, right? That's what it was called before. It was called the guard, the body scissors, or the guard, is we wrestle out of the position. Yes, I can sweep. I teach a few sweeps, not a lot, because I don't want my students on their backs because they're going to get hit, right? I want you to cover up if you can sweep them because you have a 2-on-1 grip and you can do like kind of like a modified scissor sweep type of thing. Okay, great. Otherwise, you should be grabbing that arm and wrestle out of the position to get to the top position. So we're focusing on wrestling out of that guard from the bottom with hand control. Hand control, control. It doesn't matter if you have a lapel or just hands, right? I want to disable their hands. If you don't have your hands, you can't pass my guard. Okay? What's rule number 3? Have a guard you shall not pass. Okay? So nothing I'm teaching is out of the scope of combat-based philosophy.
Absolutely, because Chris always said, make them have to hold you in guard.
Yeah.
If they're not holding you in guard, come
Why
up.
are you in guard?
Yeah.
Why are you even
Exactly.
in guard? That's the whole.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is it's like what I learned from Hickson in the white and blue belt days before the sport exploded, when pulling guard was very much rewarded. And like Hickson was not happy with Hoist winning those fights from guard. And if you'll say, well, Hickson, you won from guard too. It's like, yeah, but I didn't choose guard. Guard happens because you somehow fucked up trying to be on top. But you'd better have a way to neutralize your mistake. And the guard was originally something that neutralized the shitty fact that you're on bottom. Neutralizing it so well, it rewards you, Pavlov's dog. And then that rewarding becomes an art in and of itself, especially when you remove strikes.
And so we're just wrestling out of the position. We're not playing a guard to lay on our backs. We're using the guard because you screwed up and you're stuck in that position. Wrestle out. We have 2 terms: wrestle out, wrestle up. Wrestle out to wrestle up to the top position. So either stand up all the way or just grab a quarter Nelson, throw them over, grab a 3/4 Nelson, go to the back, take the back, crab ride. I don't teach back takes the way Jiu-Jitsu people do back takes with the 2 long hooks in and stuff like that. To me, it's counterintuitive because I have so many leg locks from there. If for most people, they never experienced a Fujiwara or a Billy Robinson leg lock from a long hook on the back take. So my students are traumatized. They know that if their leg's stuck too long, as soon as they feel my hand anywhere near them, they start shaking. No, don't do it, don't do it. Then they get up real quick. So it's really like, how do you just set the foundation, right? Of, well, what's your intent? My intent is to follow the combat-based rules. Number 1, be the person on top. Number 2, win on top, stay on top. Okay, if you just focus on those 2 things, that's catch wrestling. It is. Sorry, it is what it is. Right? Now, you can have a variety of entries. You can have a variety of techniques to get there. But I have to follow those principles. Why? Because it was beaten into my soul. So for me, the best answer to the combat-based philosophy is taking this part of catch wrestling, taking this part of judo, taking this part of... I have to understand the guard from jiu-jitsu, but I don't have to... Number 4, right? I'm not going to be seduced by the lazy, rewarding nature of the guard. Okay?
You see, I'm a Taoist who completely believes you got to do both. You have to both fall in love with the guard, which also means falling in love with passing guard, and reject it simultaneously. That's what gives both of those things the yang to the yin and the yin to the yang.
And the funny thing is, I play guard a ton. Why? Because I have to train my students how to destroy the guard. I'm always playing guard. And but I don't play guard in a conventional way. Sometimes if they're training for tournaments, right, I have to give them more of a jiu-jitsu look, right? Because like, oh, okay, you're going to do this, but I want them to, work out of it.
Because that sport rewards the people who have better guards and better passing.
Yeah.
That's what that sport rewards.
And it's also like you want to be familiar with all of it.
Yes.
I play a very small, like I feel like jiu-jitsu is so broad and I play this much of it, but I want to be familiar so that I can defend against the rest of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's just like, you have to be familiar with everything, but at the same time, if you have the proper foundation, then it all makes sense. So Billy Robinson used to have this saying, you have to learn how to learn. And most people misunderstood that saying for 20 years. And what he really meant by that was, when you learn how to learn, you have to learn how to see. Well, what is this technique here? I don't have to somebody teach me. I have to be able to look at a position and learn what the counter is in real time. I have to learn what the deficiency is. I have to learn to see where the holes are and where I can recounter, right? So that's something that you have to kind of learn how to do. Most people, I tend to see these days in, the sport jiu-jitsu world as an example, they just want to do their game. That's another thing I do differently. I don't teach my game. I teach the foundational principles of submission grappling. Okay. Yes, I have elements of judo, elements of Greco, elements of jiu-jitsu, elements of catch, primarily catch, sambo, everything,
awesome
right?
Sambo shit. Yep.
But I don't teach my game. I teach the principles, I teach the mechanics, I teach the philosophy. So everybody has the same philosophy, right? Because all my students, it's burned in. Number one, be the person on top. Number two, when on top, stay on top. Number three, have a guard shell up. They already know this. Mm-hmm. So their foundation is combat based. But then how they are kind of expressing it is going to be more of a catch wrestling perspective, because we're not going to be spending a lot of time in the guard. When we're in the guard, there is a sense of urgency to get up, because I also look at it from an MMA perspective, a fight perspective. How long do you want to sit there and get hit in the face? When like you see this now in MMA, it's just like, what is the guard doing for you anymore? You're sitting there, you're getting elbowed. How many times do you want to get elbowed? How many concussions do you want to have? How many times do you want to get hit in the head? Get up. If they're not, like Chris said, if they're not holding you down, get up. Mm-hmm. You better figure out how to wrestle out of that position. Otherwise, you're going to keep getting smashed.
Now, the one thing where, like, to every rule, and I agree with that, there are exceptions, right? So if you are the smaller, weaker opponent in a no-holds-barred street or sport deal, you had better have a really good guard, because the odds are you're going to be on bottom. When you're Melissa against a 220-pound dude, does she want to stand up and box that guy? Probably not. Will she get him in a big throw? Probably not. Will she end up on the ground with him on top? Probably. And you had better take that to the ground in a controlled way, which is pulling guard, rather than have this awful fight and get thrown down. Now you're injured and trying to pull off a guard.
And then from there, my best choice would be to have a really dynamic back take from the guard and get on his back, where I don't have, it's the best thing to do. Yes. If I'm with the 200-something pound person by choice, this isn't self-defense. We're talking about a hypothetical situation where we're fighting each other, because I'm not just trying to get away. I'm trying to actually fight. So it would be best to have
choke nestled between. You better hold me down, and I'm going to get.
But I'm just arguing that the one I want is to get on the back.
Yes.
Because usually they fight out of the choke and the arm lock, and the sweep is hard because they're so big.
And it's the one spot where even when you're on the bottom, when you're on their back on the bottom, you're still clearly in an advantage
dominant
spot.
Position. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas every other spot, who's ever on top slightly makes a shift, except the back. A mount reversed is a guard. A back mount reversed is on the back. It's still a back, which is why if I made the sport rules, you would get 5 on the back, not 4.
And -1 for pulling guard?
And -1 for pulling guard.
Disqualified for pulling guard.
Oh, my.
Let's just take it out all the way.
DQ.
I would do only minus. And I would definitely, if I was going to award any kind of points, it would be for how long you were in the spot of controlling. We would have computerized cameras reading everything. If you spent, in a 10-minute match, if you spent 8 in the mount with a free hand, that would be worth more than 4 points. It would be every X amount of time you're getting points. If it's this constant, this, and this, no one hardly ever scored, and it would be a draw. And like, yeah, I would totally change it with the use of modern cameras, algorithms, and sport. Where
An AI.
you could AI analyze in a pure grappling match who was in the better spot for the longer amounts of time. Like back in the olden days, if it was 0-0, whoever was on top when the bell rung, that's whose hand is raised.
And now it's whoever has the better patch.
Yep. Now it's
Patches.
whoever wears the patch that matches the referee or a Baja Gracie.
Yeah, it's very true.
And that's the politics of the sport.
You know, how come people still to this day do the shoulder of justice wrong? Because they're not coming to learn from you? I think that's what it is.
I don't want to say that I'm the only one who knows it.
But they're doing it wrong. Because when I have people coming to me and I try and teach to them properly, like, oh, I almost passed out. I'm like, yeah, that's the point.
I mean, I think like if I take a blue belt who thinks they know an armbar really well, they might, and I'm going to fix a few things. I'll go, oh my God, I don't even know how to do an armbar right. That, like, the wrong right thing is sometimes gets murky if something's wrong or right. There are people that do things that I think are quote unquote wrong, but
But it
they
works
do them
for them.
so well, it works. And there are people that will claim what they do is right, and I'll go, well, for me, that's not exactly right. And I know other people, well, that won't work very well for, right? So, yeah, I mean, not that you meant that in that way, but I think the whole wrong-right argument is a trap, a psychological trap.
Yeah, I should say that they have no effectiveness.
Yeah, ineffectively.
It's ineffective shoulder of justice, right?
But they think they're doing it
They think
effectively.
they're doing it.
Okay.
Well, it's like I remember in the early days helping to train some guys who became big name wrestlers in MMA. And they would think after one class, oh, now I understand how to block a triangle. As if it's just knowledge.
Yeah.
And the guys that came out of the Jeet Kune Do world were even worse. They thought if they had the class, then they knew it and could store it in all the items that they knew. It's like, no, now you've been introduced. Now it's refinement for the rest of your life. And it's like in the same way that the Brazilian black belt guard master could easily sub the wrestler, they couldn't handle the clinch of a Greco guy. They thought they knew how to clinch until they had real Olympic level Greco do underhooks on you. You're like, fuck, I can't clinch that at all. And it's exhausting me. And the pressure. And the pressure game on the ground, I believe, came from the blending of Greco hip control, Judo framing, JiuJitsu control. And then when you get that, you get an emergent property called pressure. So it was emergent. And maybe they figured it out back in ancient Rome and Greece, and then it was lost. But I really believe that early 90s was a period where the pressure game was emergent as a result of the influence of multiple cultures.
But why do you think then that it's just gotten to the point now where everybody's so into like that capoeira style of jiu-jitsu and acrobatics, or they all just
Because
kind
they're
of
young.
The young people are. Us old people, we don't play that way.
Because when I watch that stuff, it's like I can't watch it. Like some of my students who send me this stuff, hey, they laughing, Coach, what do you think of this? And I go, you know, I can't stand this. Why are you showing this to me?
But I also think that that's because youth favors movement, and old age favors knowledge and grit, right? So we're going to play to our strengths. But when I was younger, I would play to my strengths, which was, be more like a cat, be as agile as a fucking monkey. It's kind of like the simple sweep worked really well until you went against wrestlers, which I was one, who would just do a back step and land on their feet. You'd sweep them and they'd step back and come back on their feet because they're trained to stay on your feet no matter back arching motherfucking what.
Yeah.
And So suddenly it made the sweep. You have to do much more control, including on the rise up, not just sweep. Oh, now I can come up. So the sweep that we often learned in like 1989 was adapting to the opposing combat sports. So that period in the 90s, which I call the Cambrian explosion of this, where suddenly it was evolving into all these areas, and some areas went extinct. And some areas that you thought were extinct would suddenly come back when they changed the rules in whatever sport, whether it's Chuck's Barnyard, grapple off, OTM, overtime rules, whatever it is, changes how we fight because environment is stronger than will. What I want to know about is how did martial arts and your life both help and hinder your personal life?
No comment. No.
No, that's deep.
Yeah.
And we can get really deep on this. I grew up in a very, very dark, abusive household that I wouldn't wish on anyone. And I grew up in a family where I felt like my parents literally hated me. So I didn't have any nurturing, any love. It was just, there was constant violence. I was absorbed in Bruce Lee movies and something we had here in Southern California back in the day called Kung Fu Theater on the weekends. So you'd have all these movies from China and Kung Fu, and I kind of absorbed myself in that because I was just like, well, I got to figure out a way to kind of quote unquote defend myself. Why I say that is there's a couple things. Number one, just you asked the question, so I'm going to be very open here. I was constantly threatened in the sense that my dad used to say to me, I'll be the one who kills you. So when you grow up and every week, multiple times a week, you're being told by this person, looking you dead in the eye, after they're done beating you, I'll be the one who kills you. You're like, oh shit, well, I better figure this out because I don't want to get killed, right? And I didn't get any like love or support from the other side because if I was getting beaten, my mom would be cheering him on. So it was really this really psychotic dynamic where it's just like, this is not for me. And so I always kind of say like, I learned from my parents how not to be as a human being. They gave me great lessons in terms of how not to be a man, how not to be a father. You know, I had to figure out my way of how I wanted to be a man, how I wanted to be a father, how I wanted to be a person in the world. But, you know, I would get beaten for getting B's on a test because my dad said, you're not allowed to have problems and you can't get anything less than an A. And so when you're talking about getting beaten, I'd be asleep at night. He would flip on the light at midnight, pull me out of bed. I'm stunned, rip my clothes off and beat me naked. This is something that would happen on a regular basis. Me and my brother were called the Zebra Brothers because we had purple stripes down our backs and our legs, and we had to wear special clothes to cover it up because it was just, you know, that was what we were dealt with, the belts, hangers, whatever. So I wouldn't even say I was angry. I was just I was just sad. I was just alone, you know? And so it's just like, well, I knew I wasn't going to do that to other people. And I would just hide in my room with two things, music and martial arts. And then the one escape that I had, because my dad always says, you know, part of his regime was you have to have some kind of sport. Well, I had no coordination for football or soccer or basketball or anything like that, but I could do martial arts. I naturally just gravitated to martial arts. So I started with, you know, karate and Hapkido and Judo and stuff like that. And I said, well, look, at the end of the day, if I have at least a little bit something, I have a fighting chance. Right? So that my whole idea was like, I was in love with the martial arts, but I wanted a fighting chance to make sure he wasn't going to be, like he would always say to me, he wasn't going to be the one that kills me. So if I have a fighting chance, maybe I can survive and then get out of the house or something, but I wouldn't have anywhere to go. So I don't know. I always felt like it'd be easier for me to be homeless than to be in the environment that I was in. So it shaped me in terms of it martial arts gave me a home. And a lot of the places I went, it was just like a family. It's just like people that wanted to kind of help me, or even just say something as simple as, hey, I'm proud of you. You did a good job. Things that I never heard at home. And just like, instead of like that hatred that I had against me at home, and this disgust that people had for me being alive, so to speak, it didn't exist in the martial arts world, you know. So that's the side of it that helped me. It helped me develop as a man, as a human being. On the flip side, the hindrance was that I'm an obsessive type of person. So whatever I do, I'm just obsessed with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to have relationships, romantic relationships or something like that, if somebody is not in it with you. And me and Chuck used to laugh about this, because we had relationships with women and stuff where, I'd be in bed leg locking somebody in the middle of the night, not on purpose, but it was just like, why get off my leg? Get off my leg. I'm like wrapping, or you're wrapping up somebody's neck, and stop choking me. You have to tap. You're like obsessed. Like, if they weren't tapping, I wasn't letting go, and it's like dangerous, but that was the level of this obsession that I had, because it was so much like development, what I needed to cleanse myself. There was a purge that was going on. So if I had a girlfriend that lived with me, or I was married for a while, I always slept in separate rooms, because like, there's no way I can lay next to you. You're just constantly doing stuff. You're grabbing hands, you're twisting, you're leg locking, you're doing all this stuff. It's like, I don't know that I'm doing it. But like, what were you dreaming about? Oh, I was in the garage and this happened.
Chris is smashing me.
So I tried to fight back for dear life. Yeah. So that's what it was for me. And it's just like, I feel like now I look at martial arts in general as something that can really be a source of refuge for people and help. And my goal is to help as many people as I can, and pass on things that I think these days are often ignored, like bring the pain. We have a saying at my school, come for the pain, leave with a smile, right? It's not about injuring somebody, but there has to be pain involved.
But pain is good. Injury is bad.
Yes.
That's what I always say. You can quit for injury anytime, but exhaustion or pain, never.
And I tend to find that people who get really into this, and those of us who get obsessed with it, tend to have a higher pain tolerance and not mind that type of pain.
Yep.
Not the pain that comes with injury, but the pain that comes through application of certain techniques and rolling and stuff.
You definitely have to have a certain
tolerance
that's higher than some people.
Whereas some people who come in and the first time they're like, don't touch my neck, don't touch my neck. It's like, okay, that's going to be kind of hard to work with, but we'll try. But that person has to be willing to persevere through that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had a student for a few years that's come a few times to try to get over that don't touch my neck.
Who still has a hard time.
Who still might have a hard time with that feeling. Yeah.
Now, Bryan, you, from my perspective, sound educated. You are.
Yeah.
Let's hear about
it.
Chris cares.
Okay.
He wants to know.
Well,
so I'm sick of martial arts.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah. I went to university reluctantly, because I was just playing music. All I wanted to do was play music, and I did that successfully.
You played music. Yep.
But I ended up doing my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and everything was boring to me. So the only thing that was of interest to me was religious studies. So I did my undergrad in religious studies. That was fun, because a lot of it was sociology of religion. So I literally got sent all over the world and all over the US documenting other people's cultures in life, and how do they pray, how do they worship, how does that relate to their family, their society. So you learn a lot about people when you understand how their parents raised them and where they came from culturally, And I, by nature, am a traveler. I like to move. So that was important to me. And then I guess another like weird situation in my life, I didn't even kiss a girl until I was a senior in college because I was obsessed with playing music, and I was traveling playing music, and my manager and all these people at the time were telling me, stay away from women. They're just going to try and take money, or you're going to get them pregnant, and you don't want that. You got to focus on your guitar playing. Okay, fine. So I was petrified, like, stay away from the girls, stay away from the girls. There's all these beautiful women. I'm like, no, I got to stay away. They would literally take me off the stage and whisk me away to a private room so that no woman could look at me or touch me. It was very bizarre. But fast forward to my senior year of college, I finally kiss a girl and, have a girlfriend and everything that comes with that. About 8 or 9 months after that, she breaks up with me. I'm traumatized. I finished my undergrad. And then I went to my head professor and I said, can I do graduate studies here? And she broke up with me. I don't know what to do with my life. And he's like, no. I'm like, why? He says, you need to do one of two things. Either become a politician or start like a cult or something. He's like, because you have the gift of gab, just go take it, get a tent, go on the road, and just start preaching, do something. Like, I don't want to do that. So I had an opportunity actually to go to India. And so I had a full ride to India. Everything was paid for on the contingency that I lived in the ashram, right? Now, for people that don't know what an ashram is you're living in a temple, like in a dormitory for celibate monks. So, okay, you have to be celibate for 2 years. Well, great. I only had one experience anyways. It wasn't that great. So, what's another 2 years of celibacy? And they say, okay, no meat eating, no drinking. I'm going, I didn't do that anyways. So I grew up vegetarian, and
You were an aesthetic.
yeah. So for me, that monastic lifestyle for 2 years wasn't a big deal. And this is like, okay, I'm in a different country. I'm living in this temple. Then I can do my graduate studies there. So that's what I did. Then I came back. That was culture shock, coming back to the U.S. after living in India for 2 years. And then all of a sudden, now mind you, this was a time where we had running water, the toilets were outside, and electricity was off by 8 o'clock. Because it's in a rural village and there's not a lot. I come back and all of a sudden there's something called the internet. What the hell? And then so it was 99. Then I just like, okay, now I'm going to dedicate myself, because I had taken a couple of years off from martial arts because I was doing that. I was like, no, I'm going to dedicate myself now to doing that. And then some years later after that, I, did another graduate degree in business because I thought, oh, it's going to make me look good. It was whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, to me, at the end of the day, if anything I've learned, education has nothing to do with an institution. Education has everything to do with the person and the people you engage yourself with. Yeah. So you can be a highly educated person and never stepped a foot for a minute into a college setting and be 100 times more educated than somebody with a PhD. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really about who you surround yourself with, who your crew is, how you learn. My goal is to always be the dumbest guy in the room. That's it. If I get
I don't know about this room.
No, if I get a sense that I'm too smart for the room, I keep my mouth shut and I bow.
It's interesting because I was having this discussion with my mom the other night, who's old and is a editor, but teacher and all that stuff, is that there's an education, that there's going to school for an education and going to school for a vocation. A ticket to punch to get the better job, the bigger check. And I think one of the problems that we have with modern schooling, at least in the West, in the US and Europe, especially America, is people go to school for the wrong reasons. You should go to school because you want to have an enriched education. Yeah. You want to understand math, science, the humanities, not a ticket to punch to get in the right fraternity, to get to meet the connection, to get the good job. And that's the failures now of the elite institutions. And I'm not saying like people there don't get a good education, that they mostly do. But there's people in there, like in our world, who I think are hungry for an education. They just don't know they're hungry yet.
Well, I think that's like the general mindset of the culture where people are not focused on like, how do I spend my time providing value for other people? It's like a me culture, right? So it's not even in their consciousness of like, oh, I need to go to school so I can develop these skills so I can be valuable to others to help our community, right? That's not what people are thinking. They're like, how do I self-serve is kind of what it's like in my mind. I think
Yeah, I was having this conversation with my 99-year-old grandfather and 94-year-old grandmother who did not go to college. And they absolutely don't understand why anyone would go to college if they didn't have a specific career in mind, what they're going to do and a plan. And I was like, Grandma, I did it. And I did that. Like, look at all the things that I've been able to do, that started out with studying marine biology at UCLA. Like, yeah, I'm not a marine biologist, but I have knowledge, and I ran my own tutoring business. I taught biology at a college. I've had so many different life experiences and business experiences, which then eventually led me to doing this business that I have now. And I have all of that experience as a teacher and all the different things that I've done. And, like it's not just like this streamlined road, and I don't think they're ever going to get it because they're really, really old. But
And
hi, Grandma.
old-fashioned,
Hi,
yeah.
Grandpa. No. And old fashioned, but I mean, I was just like thinking that probably people who didn't grow up with a culture of college mindset or have that experience don't really get it,
I think that's
right?
true.
They don't
Yeah.
really understand.
And it's also like, as per last week's thing about belts being ranked, right? Like catch, you don't have belts.
Right.
And that means you're there for the knowledge. Whereas I think one of the problems, like there's a good and bad to both. Like it's kind of good that we have the belt ranking thing that comes out of the Asian arts, which comes from Japan and then all that, because then you have a goal. But then is having a goal good? Right?
Sometimes.
Because you could transfer. My goal is to get a purple belt. Not my goal is to get the knowledge of the purple belt, and that's the healthier version of that. Like there are, and I've had them come to me because I got enough clout now where it sounds kind of good if you're ranked under me. That come to me because they want the rank, not because they want the art. They want the rank, and I'm not interested in that. Like when you're hungry for the art, then the rank will come.
Unless you're a black belt, then it comes every 3 years, then every 5 years, and then
That's
I
true.
don't know how, it's so funny that you say it, because how they decided to change it up like that, because I remember back in the day, those guys were giving stripes out, black belts, like every 1 to 2 years.
They were.
and they all did it differently.
They all
though,
did it
right?
differently.
They all did it
Nobody
differently.
there wasn't a system.
No.
Yep.
And so now that there's a system, at least for us, I think it's just easier to just go, okay, that's a
Yep.
system that's recognized and we're going to follow it. Some
Yep.
of our people like to compete, and we're not going to hold the competitors to a different standard than the non-competitors
Yep.
or make up our own crap. So, we'll go with that. And
in
Call it
the
a day.
end, it's all somebody created the quote unquote authority in which we say this is the right way. Somebody way back there when gave themselves the first black belt.
yeah, they
Promoted
had to.
themselves and said, now this is the standard. And then somebody else said, I got to make a higher belt, so let's make a corral belt and a red belt. And then other arts said, oh, it's too long to get in between the belts. Let's add more colors. When from what I understand, the original black belt was, there was only a white belt. And people didn't have washing machines back in the olden days. And your white cotton herringbone weave belt would get soiled after a while and become brown. That was the brown belt. Then you would have a black satin swath sewn over the brown belt. That's the black belt. And then eventually that wears through and you go back to being a white belt. So, like, to me, that's a much more metaphorical, spiritual analogy of belts. I almost think it's, in some ways, like, I change my mind all the fucking time because I'm a Hegelian Taoist, but that
Okay.
the colored belts are kind of fucking stupid because all it is a way to create a testing system and a ranking system to keep people who would otherwise quit.
Well, but at the same
But then at
time,
the same
all
time,
of
yeah.
the things that you say, which we don't have to get into right now, and we could get into down the road of analogies for different belts, I think that it's a pretty simplistic approach and a progression through the knowledge.
Yes.
And, and it also helps differentiate people for competition.
For competition. Yeah,
You don't
now
want-
I love the color belts.
Okay.
But
Well, you change your mind all the time. You hated them a second
he
ago.
does.
I'm giving in the purest a perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part
And
of
then,
it.
yes, in the practical perspective, in a complicated art such as the jiu-jitsu, I think the white, blue, purple, brown, black is completely adequate. I even now think that the kids' belt leading up to a blue is fine.
Yeah, but they really did a number with that
They
because it's like
fucked it up,
gray
yeah.
and yellow and this, and there's 3 at each level.
It's too much.
It's a little too much. I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I can't.
You can't hang with it?
No.
Yeah, it's a lot. But we don't have a kids program, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
At one
There you go.
point, I had a couple of kids, and I gave my daughter and a couple of others the gray belt with the white stripe. And that's as far as I got with a kids program. So it's over. She quit when she was 9. She's 14. It's all good.
I can't believe she's 14.
Right?
Jeez.
I know.
I know.
What the heck?
No,
We
it's-
must be getting old.
No,
huh?
I just remember the day you came in and you told me you were pregnant. I'm like, you can't be pregnant. You're like my best training partner. That was traumatizing.
Oh, I didn't know you felt that way.
You know, not in a bad way. Allison's a beautiful girl. But it was, when you have a particular lifestyle and a group and all
Big
of a sudden,
change.
it's a huge
Big
change.
change. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a huge change.
These
especially-
women running off and getting fucking pregnant.
Yeah.
And now women are rolling through their entire pregnancies. And I don't really have a comment on that. I just
You
kinda
stopped
scary.
at 3 months or 4?
no, you see it on. I see it on the internet, and I don't know anything about
No,
their
I think
particular
you stopped like 4 months.
lives.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I
out a little.
I rolled, but was like, hey, I'm pregnant, and then maybe around 3 or 4 months, I can say with Allison, and I went and trained with Vanessa Mariscal in El Segundo, and we did kickboxing for my whole pregnancy there, which was super fun. And I didn't even look pregnant when I was pregnant with her.
Vanessa's a tough SBG black belt now.
Yes, and she was a MMA fighter as
MMA
well.
fighter, yep.
And has good striking and an excellent coach and personal trainer in Portland. But anyways, yeah, so she would tell me that people ask, how come that heavy chick is moving so fast? They couldn't tell I was pregnant.
That's funny.
But then with Andy, I think I taught the whole
You did.
I
teach
taught
the whole time.
jujitsu the whole pregnancy.
Yep.
I taught jujitsu, but I didn't like roll hard. I wasn't like, yeah, I don't know. It made me nervous. And I generally think if something makes you nervous and you're pregnant, you probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Probably.
Good call.
Well, Brian, so now in your life, you are a proud father.
Yeah.
You have an awesome martial arts program, which I call, again, true mixed martial arts.
And you'll be there June 8th.
I'll be
seminar.
there
We have
June
to make
8th.
sure we announce that, June 8th. For any person that thinks they know anything about grappling, if you have not trained with Chris Haueter, you must come to a Chris Haueter seminar. The easiest one to come to right now is Saturday, June 8th, 11 a.m., PCI Jiu-Jitsu in Mission Viejo, California. I don't care what your instructors say, Chris Haueter will teach you something you've never seen before, period.
And I will say that I've gotten most of that knowledge with my own little twist from the Machado brothers and the Gracies. And that is because you got to hand your proper coaches their proper due. And can you fill us out or roll us out with some wisdom?
Let's see. Number 1, be the person on top. Number 2, win on top, stay on top. Number 3, have a guard you shall not pass. Number 4, do not be seduced by the guard, the lazy, rewarding nature of the guard. Okay? And always remember rule number 1. It's very simple. I think everybody should really go out there and be open-minded. For goodness sake, stop. There's so much pettiness and cattiness in the grappling world these days. Be open-minded. Go train with different people. I am one of those people. I push my students to go to different open mats. So everybody should be open-minded enough to go and explore, learn from other people. you're missing something if you're staying within your bubble, you know? And we always have an open door policy at my place. So everybody's always welcome. You know, when we do our Catch Wrestling Concept Series seminars, they're only $20. I literally charge them the same price as a mat fee. So there's no barrier to entry, no excuse why you can't come to learn some catch wrestling. You know, again, just be open-minded and train with other people because you have no idea what you're missing. And sign up for combatbase.com. Let's go. It's got to be done.
Pound the like button, hit subscribe.